All right, Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava, and I'm doing another episode in my Bhakti Q&A series, answering questions that people have about Bhakti Yoga or the path of yoga more generally. I had someone ask this question today, and I thought it would be worth making a video over. Actually, I've gotten this question a bunch of times and have never gotten around to making a video about it. Why are Bhaktas vegetarians? Do I have to become a vegetarian to do Bhakti Yoga? Great question. Hopefully, this will help. So, the short answer is no, you don't have to become a vegetarian to do Bhakti Yoga, um, but it sure does help. And eventually, if you get serious enough about Bhakti, it's kind of an inevitable part of the process of committing yourself more deeply to Bhakti Yoga. And I suspect most yogic traditions would say the same thing outside of even the Bhakti tradition. But why is that? It's not because necessarily it's oh, I want to stop global warming, which is a nice, definitely, like that's a nice thing to not want to perpetuate harm to the environment. We know that a lot of the meat and dairy industry is probably part of the problem. um, it could be that someone has an argument against bad karma. Well, we know that in the Christian tradition, thou shalt not kill is a thing. And we know that in the yogic tradition as well, killing isn't necessarily a good idea. And for the sake of karma, if you're doing karma yoga, definitely not a good idea to be killing things. I mean, really, even like bugs, if you can let a bug out of your house, probably better than killing it if you can help it. Sometimes you can't, okay. But generally speaking, not killing things is just a matter of not accruing bad karma, just in general. Now, there are like macro and micro acts of killing. This world is actually a constant cycle of yajna, which means sacrifice. So it's like this, in a sense, this world is like a fire and everything's being poured into it. Life is being poured into it, and then it feeds on the life and it keeps going. So life needs life in this material universe to live. And so there's a cycle. It's like in the Lion King, the circle of life. It's like that here. Things eat each other. You can't even, you probably scratch your arm, you're going to kill some microorganisms. You go walking in the woods, you're going to step on ants. So it's not as though yogis are so naive as to think that it's easy to avoid or possible to avoid killing or suffering or one thing dying in order that another might live. So that's I think yogis are very like just wide-eyed, open about that truth. I think eyes are wide open. No one's trying to deny that or paint some kind of paradise picture perfect scenario where everyone's just totally everyone's blissed out and there's no violence. There's no Yogis don't really believe that's even possible. In fact, in the material dimension of reality, because the material dimension of reality's nature is this kind of cyclical life feeding on life. And there are more or less harmonious examples of, I mean, so, when we want to think of that as beautiful, we talk about the way that ecologies naturally recycle themselves. Well, it's nice to think about that. It's a beautiful image to have in our minds. But when we talk about an ecosystem recycling itself, we're talking about it, there's things that are getting eaten alive. You know what I mean? So like there was I remember there was a documentary that I watched, and I think I might have mentioned this in a previous video. It was about Taoist hermits living in the mountains. And, there was a young journalist who was visiting them, and he was like, so you're going out to sit in nature and meditate and like find peace in nature? And, the Taoist sage was like, you go and sit on a rock, out in the woods somewhere for a couple of weeks, just sit there and you'll see what nature is. In other words, if you were to go out in the woods and sit and not move for a couple of weeks, you'd be eaten, right? You'd have a hard time surviving. And that's nature. So don't glamorize it, was sort of what his message was. It's not to say that it's evil either, just don't glamorize it. We tend to think, well, either I glamorize it or I'm saying it's evil. That's our own problem with extremes, right? So yoga is not about glamorizing peace and making violence evil. In fact, it's very totally wide-eyed, no denial about what's going on here and our inevitable participation in it. The idea is to limit our participation in it with good practices, but not just so that we have better karma, not so that, there'll be a really great, like, Woodstock concert at some point or whatever. Like, it's not like a utopian ideal for society that we do this, although that could be a byproduct of it. The reason for being a vegetarian, outside of minimizing harm and not accruing bad karma and treating things as though every living being that's taking a form is part and parcel of God. And that's the part that really matters, is that we learn to see the trees, the plants that we eat, which are also in some cases dying, the animals that are crawling around and in the world, that we see them all as jivas, which means souls, spirit souls, embodied, eternal, unborn, undying beings who are having different kinds of experiences. Would I want to be eaten? No, right? So we have to eat while we're here to sustain our bodies. And so one of the reasons that we do this is because we are, it's not just do no harm, it's not just a moral, it's not just do not kill, it's not just sustainability, it's not just some kind of utopian thing about peace. Not, it's also, it comes right down to how we see things. How do we see things as living expressions of God? Now, given that it's also impossible to, we have to eat. So even plants are living beings and we're going to kill plants. One of the reasons that I've had it explained to me by some of my teachers and mentors that plants are a little different. Let's say seed or berry plants. You can take seeds or berries from plants, for example, fruits and vegetables. And oftentimes the plant doesn't die. So you can take the fruits from an apple tree and the tree doesn't die. You can take seeds and nuts and so forth, and it's not going to die. Now it's a little different when we're going, everything's, there's a lot of destruction that goes on these days with any kind of food, right? So I'm not trying to make any idealization here, but there's less damage. That's the basic idea. Because you're inherently not sort of eliminating a being in order to eat. But you're taking from what a plant or tree naturally gives off, right? So that's one thing. Trying to take what is naturally given rather than taking something that's not being given. That's one critical difference that, again, it's not the goal. It's that when we do that, we also are doing better for our bhakti. What is bhakti all about? One of the core verses of the Sri Ishupanishad says that in order to be situated in a place where we can focus on developing love of God in the heart, listening to God, knowing how to act and move in our lives because we serve God in our homes through our mantra meditation, through everyday life, is, we have to be in a space to be receptive to those practices. And we have to be in a space that's receptive to, connecting and communing with God every day. It's harder to do so when our consciousness becomes clouded over by violence, by killing. And there are degrees. I mean, we might have to kill while we're here. Even the scriptures tell us that that's like an inevitable part of life here. But we do so in a way that sort of reduces the amount of intense, darkening energies in our mind. And that increases our ability to do yoga, to do bhakti, So, and not only that, but we take it a step farther. It's not just do no harm. It's not just, eat plants and vegetables or whatever. It's also that we offer those things, that we're cooking what we're cooking, we're making what we're making. Even more so than being a vegetarian is that we're a prasadatarian, which means we take whatever we're making and we offer it to our altar. Like on our altar at home here, we have Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, and we give our food to them. We ring a bell, we say some mantras, and after they've eaten, then we eat. It's a sort of symbolic ritual. And with kids and everything and being newer to it, we're getting better at the discipline of it, because it's not easy to do all the time. Sometimes you forget, or sometimes you don't have much time, or sometimes you're not around an altar. And so there's ways of modifying this practice to make it accessible to your lifestyle, and we could talk about that in a separate video. In fact, I'll do a separate video on that. But the point is that we're also wanting to offer to God food that has been offered and prepared, and then after God eats, then we eat the remnants. And people might say, well, how does God eat? Well, like, for example, if you have deities on your home altar, so the deities, that the spirit that inhabits the deity, the spirit of God, said to be able to eat through its eyes, eat through its hands, eat through, so it can eat through its appearance. It doesn't, like, God can hear through his nose, God can see through his ears, God can touch through his look. So this kind of thing, right? So we say that if you place food on the altar, God eats it. And then what's left in physical form is then spiritualized. So it's a form of like sanctifying what we eat. Many traditions do this kind of thing, right? Kind of some kind of prayer before you eat to make sure that you're in a spirit of gratitude and so forth. Even cultures that sometimes that have had to kill, for the sake of survival, in cold climates where, you might need to eat meat, extreme cold climates and stuff like that. Whatever the case might be, you've always seen human beings practicing this understanding that this thing had to die for me to live. We take it kind of a step further in bhakti, and we say, everything that I have is given to you first before I take anything. And in the Sri Ishopanishad, it said that a person should have no more than what is allotted to them, no more than sort of, what's necessary. You shouldn't be hoarding things away and taking things in a spirit of greed, consumption. Think about the spirit that's involved with killing something savagely also, as opposed to taking things from fruits, trees, grains, vegetables, growing things that can be in a continuous cycle of birth and rebirth and so forth. So that is a little different than, the literal act of killing something. And it's, you can feel the difference if you think about it very basically. So is it a perfect process? Does it involve zero harm? No, but that's not the point. Point is to offer things to God that have been most peacefully harvested and can be most peacefully offered, and then most peacefully sanctified and eaten and taken in ourselves. The point of that is not because that's going to make utopia. The point of that is it's not going to change the fact that, there's probably things killing each other outside the woods in my house right now. But it does change the vibration of our mind. It changed the vibration of our thoughts and our lifestyles so that they become more hospitable for the practices of bhakti, the chanting, the eating, the studying, the kirtan. Those things become more sattvic, more clean in that way. So everything in bhakti that we do is not really, for itself. It's for how it helps us sort of trying to create like a clean temple for these other kinds of activities. So that's why, we're vegetarians. Also, we're not vegans. That's a big important difference, because especially cow products, when the cows are loved and cared for as divine friends of Krishna, like really loved and cared for, the products of ghee or milk, these kinds of things will be used in cooking. That's because of the place that the cow holds. And if you've ever been to like a goshala in India, like a bhakti community, the cows there are loved. I mean, they're really, really cared for. So, and I've had opportunity to visit some myself, and they're considered sacred, divine, very, very special beings. So at any rate, that's kind of one exception. There's not, total aversion to animal products as in veganism. So at any rate, obviously something different if you're talking about factory farming and stuff like that. But so the other thing, last thing to say is that, you try your best with these things, but the point is also not to cultivate a legalistic or ritualistic attitude towards spirituality. So we're vegetarians, but we're not We're not like kind of sort of militantly trying to convert people or shaming people for doing this or that, or um, it's that would go against what the whole purpose of being a vegetarian is about in terms of the vibration or mood that it's trying to create in our lives to make space for bhakti. So, and it's also something that, some people may not be able to do right away. Maybe it's a little difficult, and some people have to be very careful, with their diets, making sure you get enough of the right things that sometimes people are used to getting in a different kind of diet, a meat oriented diet, and then you switch over to vegetarian. You have to be careful. Are you getting your B12, or I mean, just whatever. So, one should always make the transition with care and not out of a spirit of fanaticism as well. Or anyway, that's what I've got for you guys. I hope this was interesting, and Hare Krishna.